Hi, everyone. We are just getting through a few technical issues, and
Good. All right. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us as we get this technology working right. So I want to start today. Unfortunately, I think we need to start on a tragic note. This morning, the U.S. Surgeon General said that things were going to get bad this week, and we've already seen that happen here in Burlington with the news that 3 more individuals who were in the Burlington Health and Rehab Center have died as a result of COVID-19 infections. This is a terrible tragedy, and my heart goes out to everyone who has lost a family member, as well as to the many, many family members who still have loved ones inside the building and are fearful for their safety. I think what I can say about this situation now is that this issue clearly has the attention of the Department of Health, the agency that regulates this facility and has the capacity to address the crisis there. What is needed now is immediate action before there's further tragedy. Commissioner Levine must get the patients in the rehabilitation floor that has not yet been infected out of the building to a safe place where their medical needs can be accommodated and where there is no risk of contaminating other sensitive populations. I know this is a complicated task. That's why it's been taking time, but it has to happen. Further, the Department of Health and the center then, once those patients are no longer in the building and there's additional space in the building, they then need to take immediate further action to ensure that the CDC guidance calling for as much physical separation between positively identified patients and those that are not yet positive be achieved as quickly as possible. Even with our testing capacity in Vermont remaining at woefully low levels, the Department of Health needs to find a way to do the testing necessary is achieved. I now want to turn the attention on this call to other aspects of the city's response to the COVID-19 emergency, as well as to what is going to be happening tonight at the city council meeting. Let me kind of first start by sharing where I'm at in terms of thinking about what the city's response needs to be and what the governmental response in general needs to be. My thinking here is shaped in part by a statement that I tweeted out this morning, but I'm gonna read it here again. And basically, I what I want to say in sharing this is I remain very confident that we will make it through this storm, despite its size, despite the unprecedented degree of challenge that we're facing. But the key to that, I think a lot of the key to that does come down to governmental action. And we are talking about big efforts, and I think some people are concerned about the risk of overreaction. And there's a individual named Neil Kashkari. He is the president of the Minneapolis Fed. He played a big role in the successful recovery from the 2008 fiscal crisis. And here's what he said over the weekend. He said, when the downside scenario is devastating, as devastating as what we're looking at, you should overreact. The right policy response is to overreact to try to avoid the terrible downside scenario. So whether it is the health policy response or the fiscal policy response or the monetary policy response, we should be erring on the side of doing too much. That kind of thinking, that we need a big response from governments at all levels, local, state, and federal, has really been guiding me from the beginning of this. That's why I've been pushing for big public health changes to achieve social distancing, and why I continue to advocate for more, and why I'm pleased to hear that the governor is considering additional orders. I think we need additional orders, and I've conveyed that to him. I think we also need to start turning our mind, while we're in no way done with the public health response, as is obvious. We also need to start turning our mind to the recovery and relief effort. And a lot of this city council resolution that is going to be acted on tonight, I hope, addresses the recovery and relief effort. We're going to try to get up here on the screen a PowerPoint that we can walk through. So a lot of what you're going to see on the screen is about, again, it's about this recovery and relief effort. I don't want to in any way suggest that this is coming at the expense or instead of all the public health actions that are continuing to place and that need to. But it is not too soon for us to be thinking about how we get through this financially, because we have this co-occurring financial crisis that is stunning and that has led to the crash of markets around the world, and that has more immediately, we see here in Burlington, led to well more than 1,000 Burlingtonians losing their job last week, and which we know is going to have rippling and continuing economic impacts for some time. So here's the resolution that we've just posted to board docs in recent hours, and we got it up as soon as we could. And we have been in consultation last night and today with both of the Democrat and the Progressive caucuses, in which I'm hopeful will have strong city council support tonight. It does a number of things. Here are the kind of big picture things. First of all, it establishes what we're calling the Burlington COVID-19 Resource and Recovery Center. This is going to be, we believe, the place where essentially we get as much help as possible to as many Burlingtonians as possible, as quickly as possible. I'll describe more about that in a moment, but let's go through each of the top kind of top line things. So we are going to make changes tonight that provide meaningful relief to Burlington residents and businesses by delaying or waiving certain fees and tax deadlines. And we're also going to get authorization from the council to do work in the weeks ahead to come back with a plan for even more significant relief in the weeks ahead. We're also I think it's important, while we're doing everything we can to help Burlington residents, help the people who have lost their jobs, help people who are living on the street and need a home, especially in a time where having a home is a key part of the public health response. At a time when we're doing everything we can to help Burlington businesses survive this economic tsunami, we also need to be taking steps to protect the city's finances, to ensure that the city stays strong and is able to stay in position to do the essential services that are needed through this crisis, and then rebuild afterwards. And so there'll be some steps in that direction tonight as well. The part of the way to do all of the above is to find resources for that. And I am recommending, and hope the council will support, using $1 million of the Burlington Telecom revenues. The transaction with Schurz Communications that is sitting in an account now, I think we need to start using these funds right away to activate the emergency response, address this crisis. And then finally, the kind of final big picture thing that we're doing tonight is we're asking the council to approve a set of new policies that are emergency work and paid leave policies for city employees. So to basically ensure that we treat our city employees fairly during the initial stages of this emergency, we need some new work provisions, and that's what the resolution will do tonight as well. Let's go into each of these a little bit more deeply. So the Burlington Resource and Recovery Center, the concept here is that basically there's a lot of help that is coming from all levels of government for all the types of Burlingtonians I listed before and more. Certainly renters that have lost their income and are struggling and fearful of being evicted. Property owners who don't know how they are going to make their next mortgage payment and are worried about foreclosure. There are government efforts afoot at all different levels to try to help this, all these constituencies and more. But I'm already hearing frustration from Burlingtonians that are hearing frustration about the pace with which the help is coming and the challenges in accessing these resources. For example, I know that the state phone lines at the Department of Labor have been overwhelmed. So what we are doing is setting up a center where Burlingtonians can get help accessing resources from all levels of government. So what kind of help? First of all, we have been working hard. The CEDO team has been working hard over the last week to make sure that people experiencing homelessness are able to get into a home during this period where shelter is critical. A number of things have already been done. There is a facility that is being set up for people who are suspected of being positive or do test positive but are not in dire health and need to be isolated. A facility is being set up to assist them and a place for them to go. Already, hotel and motel vouchers have been provided by the state to ensure that homeless individuals who are at high risk because of their age or because of their underlying medical condition, that they can immediately get into a safe hotel space. Those vouchers are available. We don't think that everyone who could benefit from such a voucher knows necessarily how to access that. One of the things that this resource center will be to make that, to assist with that link. Workers who have been laid off are eligible for unemployment insurance. And I think what's coming from the feds is enhanced unemployment insurance. And again, I've heard people are having trouble accessing that. This Burlington center, which is staffed by a CEDO team, it is a virtual center, but it has real people that are working there that are city employees. We're going to pull in more people as we need to provide this kind of customer service. We're already talking about perhaps using some of the Burlington Electric Department staff to get that done as well. We are going to have people to actually help make that connection, make sure people can get these unemployment benefits. We're going to work with renters who need help. Jordan, I don't know if I should be concerned. The screen is saying that our internet connection is unstable. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that. Hopefully this is coming through okay. We're renters who are concerned about their housing security. We're going to work with them, make sure that they get any help that they can in staying in their home. It would be crazy for anyone to be evicted for non-payment in the middle of an economic crisis and in the middle of a public health emergency that, again, requires people to stay at home. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that just doesn't happen. We're going to work with small businesses to navigate insurance claims or federal and state resources. We are going to coordinate to disseminate health guidance in other languages through this site, through this resource. We've already pulled together some resources. Some of the materials that we have been distributing have been translated into the different languages that we have significant populations that speak those languages here in Burlington. We need more of that to happen, and this resource center is going to make sure that that happens. A really important thing that we're hearing from around the world is communities that have gotten the spread of the virus under control often have relied on volunteer efforts to make that happen. So I've been reading about fever clinics in Asia where basically great efforts are made to take the temperature of individuals that are out of their home as they're going into crowded areas, and anyone who registers a fever, they have volunteers that are taking that test and then getting the people to the clinic if further analysis is necessary. I don't know if that kind of thing is going to be necessarily possible here, but we want to be able to manage volunteer efforts in any way that is helpful. Already there are volunteers that are helping their neighbors get meals. We see the City Resource Center as providing some organizing capacity and providing some capacity to essentially quality control and make sure that these volunteer activities are not happening in a way that undermines the public health goals in any way. So more to come on that. And a final example of what this is going to do is the center will respond. We think there's going to be a whole bunch of additional things we haven't even thought of yet, but this is capacity and a focus for further actions to be quickly identified and taken. Again, as I mentioned, the work that's going to happen through the center is envisioned as constituent support. It's envisioned as technical assistance and referrals to other organizations. And we see this center playing a role in identifying gaps and assistance that haven't been met yet, and in any number of ways trying to advocate for, coordinate, get attention to these gaps as this crisis unfolds. The management structure for this effort is twofold. Luke McGowan, our CEDO director, has been doing a lot of the initial work to get this center activated. And it is initially that is staffing the center responsibilities. So we've, in the last 24 hours, we've added to the capacity of this center Darren Springer, who is the general manager at the Burlington Electric Department and who was used to be chief of staff to a governor, is used to working in a crisis, very good at pulling the levers to get government action done, good relationships in Montpelier. I think it really strengthens the team to have Darren added to it in this way. The center is open as of earlier today. And the goal right now is that all requests that come in either by phone or email will be responded to in 24 hours. Additional ways of contacting the center are going to be added to as this evolves. And the last thing I'll say about the center is that's the plan. That's what we're trying to achieve. I am sure that there are going to be errors and there are going to be delays as this new functionality, as this new city purpose, organization, function is activated. And I just, we're gonna minimize those as much as possible. We have a big team working as hard as possible to work through whatever challenges we encounter. I do ask for a little patience in the early days of this, as this gets started. For more information on how to contact the center, you can go straight to the homepage of the city, burlingtonvt.gov, and there's more information right there. So I do want to just talk for a moment about funding, why we're asking for a $1 million appropriation tonight. The salaries of workers in this center are going to be paid for out of this appropriation. The salaries of the CEDO workers are generally paid for by federal grants. We put very few local funds into CEDO workers. Those federal grants are for different activities that these workers are no longer doing because of the emergency. We need to pay these workers out of a different source. Our hope is that eventually, by doing it this way, we are organizing ourselves in a way that the federal government may reimburse many of these costs. In past disasters, many disasters, the federal government ends up reimbursing as much as 75% of emergency costs. Our hope is that that will happen here. We don't know that for sure. There have been no bills yet through Congress that commit to reimbursing municipalities, but we're hopeful that we know there is discussions of that. We're working with the federal delegation. We hope that's going to happen. Also paid for with this $1 million will be any expenses related to the Emergency Operations Center. We already have found ourselves having to source on an emergency basis hand sanitizer, masks, other supplies, and to move quickly to get those supplies in this competitive environment where all sorts of different government agencies are trying to get a hold of these supplies. Having funds on hand that allows us to move quickly is important. We could get it, again, may find ourselves dealing with contingencies and unexpected events that we don't even foresee right now. Having this reserve will give us the ability to move quickly in between city council meetings. All right, that's sort of it for now with the Emergency Operations Center. There's a number of other important points, and I do want to get to some questions in the next few minutes here, if possible. We are going to take some steps tonight to provide immediate financial relief in a number of ways. Already, just to recap, last week we suspended all utility disconnects for non-payment. So you will not get turned off your Burlington Electric Department electricity or any of the water services that the city runs for non-payment. My understanding is that the private utilities have basically followed suit. This is going to be the policy until further notice. We do encourage people that can continue to pay to do so, but you will not be cut off for non-payment. We have ceased issuing parking tickets for meter violations and for residential parking violations. We don't want people who are parked outside a restaurant to run in and pick up or curbside takeout. We heard some examples of people getting tickets during, while doing activities like this, and it just seems crazy. Until further notice, we are not issuing meter violations or residential parking tickets. It is important to note, I think, that we are still enforcing prohibited area violations, violations that impact public safety, like being parked in a way that blocks traffic or pedestrians, like you see on the screen there, handicap spaces. There is still enforcement for that. So people should be aware of that. Here's the additional actions we're asking the council to take tonight. The gross, this is a tax that is paid for by bars, it is paid for by restaurants, and it is paid for by hotel operators. Basically, there is a 2% fee on top of any transactions by those entities that flows to the city. The establishments collect the dollars and then transfer them to the city at the end of the month. We're doing a couple things here. First of all, we're saying we're aware that most of these transactions have just stopped, and the city was likely to lose 80% or more of this revenue anyway. To the degree that there is still restaurant activity going on, what we want to help those restaurants make it through this incredibly challenging and unexpected time. So from now until June 30th, restaurants are still allowed to charge and should charge the 2% local gross receipts tax, but they have the authorization to keep those funds as a city support for getting through this period. We are asking restaurants to continue to report how much they collect to us in the hope that perhaps this can be emergency damages that the city might be able to recoup funding for, or partially for, in the future, and so that we have some sense of what impact this has. But the paperwork for that, for those reports, is not due for until the end of April, instead of being due at the end of March, as would be normal. I do feel a need to point out, this is a critical revenue source for the city. The city does have its own financial challenges. It's unlikely, I think, that this is the right way for the city to continue to help beyond June 30th. But as a one-time thing, this is something that feels like the right thing to do, and we're happy to do it. Here's some there's some additional things that we're asking for authority on tonight. We want to waive all delinquency and interest fees for residential and commercial customers for utility bill non-payment through June 30th. So this is, if you follow me, this is different than the commitment not to disconnect. This is actually saying there will be no penalty or interest on customers who don't pay during this period either. Further, essentially all services that the city is providing on the Church Street Marketplace have ceased at this point. We don't expect them to resume soon. I'm asking the council to give me the authority to convene it's kind of technical, but a board of abatement meeting so that we can simply abate remaining fees from when this emergency started through June 30th. And then we do want to, there's a number of other things such as the sales and use tax that are set and administered by the state. Things are moving quickly. I know that the governor made some new commitments today. I'm unclear if that involved the sales and use tax. We're going to continue to talk to the state about whether any relief can be secured for Burlington businesses there. And then here's the big one, which we will not have final action on tonight, but this, I think, has the potential to be really substantial and meaningful relief for a variety of Burlington's stakeholders in the months ahead as we deal with this economic catastrophe. So we know that there are many taxpayers who are going to have trouble making their property tax payment on June 12th. Even with what has already happened, that's clearly going to be challenging. And with what I think reasonably anticipate is going to happen between now and June, we know it's going to be a big challenge for a lot of property taxpayers. We don't have all the details of this figured out, but we are asking the council to collaborate with us on this and basically support us writing a report between now and the next council meeting, next sort of working council meeting on April 13th, where we would explore how we would allow taxpayers who had been materially impacted by the crisis to delay payment of their June 12th payments, which for many taxpayers is thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, until August 12th without penalty or interest. We want to explore several additional things. We want to work with the state and explore if the same thing can be done with the education portion of the property tax payment. As I think maybe is often confusing to people, when you get a property tax bill from the city, that actually is two separate bills in one. One is your municipal property tax payment, which comes straight to the city and is used by the city for city services. The larger piece of it, more than 2/3, I think virtually 70% of your bill, actually is just collected by the city, and then all of it gets sent on to Montpelier and to the education fund. We want to explore whether the state would work with us to at least allow that portion of the tax bill to be delayed as well without penalty. We can't commit yet to either of these two things. These are explorations, but I'm hopeful about at least what the city controls. 3, we want to explore the possibility of allowing taxpayers a longer term payment plan if this downturn becomes severe. So if this goes on for months, just a delay in payment to June 12th will not be enough for many taxpayers, we know. So we want to look at whether there is a way to potentially, if this crisis worsens, set up payment plans with property taxpayers so that there could be a significant amount of time where this money could be paid back over, tax payments could be paid back over. We're going to explore that. And then finally, and crucially, if we do any of this, it's really important that any property taxpayer that has tenants of their own, whether those are residential tenants, apartment renters, or small businesses that are leasing their space from a property owner. Those are some of the most vulnerable populations in this crisis. They are experiencing economic pain. There needs to be a strong way in which any property taxpayer that the city helps with these kind of delays and potentially payment plans, that help is being passed through in a enforceable way to the to tenants. This is one of the reasons we need time to get this done. We don't know exactly what this looks like, but I think it's critical for this plan to work that we figure that out. All of this, we would be coming back at the April 13th meeting with a fleshed out plan. I'm going to end with a couple notes on social distancing. Let me say one more thing I haven't said yet about that financial plan. How is the city going to be able to do that? All that? How is the city going to be able to deal with these revenues that just disappear, as well as these revenues that might be delayed substantially? It's a different answer for each. We're going to get into discussion of this with the council tonight, and we're going to have different strategies for dealing with the revenue that just disappears versus the revenue that is delayed. The revenue that just disappears, there are really two ways to address it. Either we can cut expenses, and we already have department heads looking at what expenses can be cut over the remainder of the year. There's a significant amount. Obviously, certain activities just aren't happening anymore, and there will be savings. There's no travel taking place anymore. There are significant activities that have just ceased, and there will be savings. The other way we can address this sudden budget hole is through reallocating existing revenues, existing sources to address this new gap. And I do expect we're going to be doing some of both in the weeks and months ahead. I think I'm pretty hopeful that we have a way of doing that through combined expense cuts and using reserves that we have built up, that we can deal with this huge and sudden gap while keeping the city, keeping a significant rainy day fund available for next year, which we expect is potentially going to be even a tougher year than this year. We want to have at least a kind of 10% reserve going into next year. I'm pretty optimistic based on the financial analysis we've done so far that there's a way to do that. We'll be talking with the council again about that tonight. The delayed revenues is different. The city may have the ability, and this is one of the things, basically in a pretty low risk and low cost way, borrowing dollars so that we can make it possible for our constituents to delay payments in the way that I described earlier. Again, this hasn't been totally worked out, but that's the way I'm thinking. Money is very cheap to borrow right now. There's a lot of it out there, and the city's credit rating is strong, and we have strong protections that ultimately the city would get repaid for any of these essentially property tax loans we would consider making. So that's our logic where it is. I hope other levels of government are thinking of that kind of intervention as well. I think in that way, we really could have an impact on the big pain that we're talking about here. Final notes, and then we'll go to some questions. Social distancing saves lives. Up on the Facebook page post from yesterday, we put out a new graphic that is sort of a new way to think about different activities and what is safe, what requires caution, and what you really need to avoid. I think Burlingtonians are really responding to this call, but at the same time, we know activity happening out there that really is not consistent with the guidelines the governor has put out. You need to do everything you can to stay 6 feet or more away from people that are not in your household when you're out of your home. Play dates are a problem. Having small dinner parties at this point, I think, is a risk, even though it's not prohibited. I think we need everybody to really be taking this as seriously as possible. Doing so will keep other people alive and will protect your health. Again, as I said the other day, no one should think that just because they are young, they are guaranteed that this will not be a serious illness for them if they get it. The research is increasingly showing that even people who don't get hospitalized face serious, it's a serious thing to get COVID-19, to get coronavirus. And a non-trivial percentage, 38% of the first 500 Americans that had to be hospitalized were people between the ages of 20 and 54. So I think that's a new way to understand this disease that we should be all should be aware of. Again, from my perspective, we have to put great focus on our health and keeping people alive at this moment. That's what we're trying to do. That's what the governor's trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do with all these social distancing orders. As we get that under control, and there are some hopeful signs that maybe there are some things going the right direction. This is too early to tell for sure, but I have been monitoring the number of people in the emergency room, the intensive care unit. Those numbers remain still low. Let's do everything we can in this high risk period to keep the numbers low, and we'll figure out the relief and recovery as we go. The work happening at the council tonight is an example of how we're going to figure that out. With that, Jordan, do we have a way of taking some questions?
Yes, we do. I'm just gonna. Okay, so I'm gonna for reporters who are on the line, please, if you're using Zoom, just use the chat feature, and I can try to unmute you so you can ask your question. Our first question, though, we received by email from 7 Days. From Courtney Lambden, and her question is, does the $1 million allocation to the Resource and Recovery Center go to people affected and to the programs, or does it pay the salaries for people who are working there?
It's really three different things. It's expenses related to staffing the center. So there are, depending on how this long, there definitely could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of expense in staffing the center. It's to pay for expenses that could be of the Emergency Operations Center, which is, as some people have seen these videos that we've taken over at the police station. We have an Emergency Operations Center there. That's where our first responders are. That is where we are struggling with issues like running out of masks, getting sufficient gowns to respond properly to ambulance calls. There could be significant expenses over time in keeping emergency supplies high enough. An appropriation at this level, I think, also gives us the ability to move quickly to responding to emergency needs as they come up. I don't know what those will be, but let me give you a couple examples that that on issues that we're working on now that could turn into major expenditures where the city could have an impact by being able to move quick with these dollars. So we're right now working with the state, the Department of Children, DCF, Department of Children and Families, is working with us to try to get people out of some of our crowded shelters, homeless shelters, where really there's no way to practice social distancing in these shelters the way they're set up. One of the things that we're looking at and that we're hopeful about happening very soon is basically campers being parked at a city location where the state would pay for the campers, the city would provide the land, and the city may well have additional resources, additional costs involved in getting that facility set up. This emergency fund would allow us to move quickly to pay for costs related to that. We've been watching carefully these efforts around the country and around the region to create a lot more masks quickly, because we're seeing critical shortages in masks. It's possible the city could have to spend non-trivial resources to support an effort like that. Those are a couple of examples. What we actually spend the money on will be reported out to the council on a regular basis. I'm hopeful the council will be supportive of this idea that having some resources for the city to move quickly makes sense. Now, the support going to the dollars flowing to Burlingtonians beyond the dollars that I detailed earlier about waived fees and taxes, the direct financial assistance that people will access through the Resource and Recovery Center, I think will primarily be from other levels of government. Those are the governments that literally can print money, that can have a vast ability to make large amounts of resources available for Americans. But the Resource Center is going to help Burlingtonians access those dollars.
If there are folks from the media on the call, I'm not getting messages from you. So if you do have a question you'd like to ask, please try to use the chat function or send me an email. I think you all have my email. It's jordan@burlingtonvt.gov. I have another question from Courtney. Can the mayor clarify the memo he sent council, specifically the section which talks about using the city's $6.5 million rainy day fund and all of the $5 million of BT proceeds? What will this money be used for? Will this effectively dry up all of the city's reserves?
Great, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that, because so what we are saying is that it is, I think, entirely possible that we were expecting about $20 million more to come in to the city, and that was quite stable and predictable up until the middle of March. Of that 20 million, we think there's a real chance that 5 million of it just disappears, is never paid. It is revenue that we were going to receive on activity that now isn't happening. People staying at Burlington hotels, people staying at Burlington campgrounds and in the marina. This money is just going to disappear and never come back. Really, to address that kind of reductions or use of reserves. We're not committing to any of those budget changes. That memo is really intended to put the council and the public, to make the council and the public aware that we think that is quite likely that these revenue shortfalls are coming, and to be aware that we're going to need to make changes. Those changes would be made at future meetings, and they would be a combination. And you'll see both types. You'll see expense cuts. You'll also see reallocation of revenues and sources. I do think it's possible that this could get bad enough that we would essentially need to draw down all of the Burlington Telecom dollars, as well as other smaller reserves that the city has, just to get through the end of the fiscal year, and to keep intact $6.5 million of our unassigned fund balance. That has been always our goal, to have at a minimum a 10% fund, which is what $6.5 million represents. For we've always thought of it as a rainy day fund of sorts. We want that still wholly intact before we enter the next fiscal year that starts in July. which we also expect to be a bad year. It would give us some additional ability to supplement the budget out of those funds. So I hope that's clear. The intent is no, not to draw down all the city's resources, to keep us in a place where going into a year that right now looks like it's going to be concerning, we still have that full 10% fund in place. Dealing with the delayed revenues is the borrowing idea that I talked about earlier, and we won't repeat now.
I have a question from Zuri. Zuri, I'm gonna try and do something I haven't done before, which is let's see here.
For anyone that doesn't know Jordan, Jordan is the
Hello.
chief of staff here in the mayor's office, and also our tech guru in the mayor's office.
Zuri, are you able to ask your question? I don't know
All right,
if that works.
I see they're written out here, though.
We'll just answer your question.
Zuri's question is, what is the plan after June 30th to help local restaurants and residents with utility fees? Are you working on something more long-term if this lasts longer? Yeah, so absolutely. Like this, people should see this as an initial step in what the city can do quickly and immediately. It's really just been, a little over a week since the governor declared an emergency. Today is 1 week since I declared a city emergency. This is what we've been able to figure out so far. If this economic crisis deepens, we will certainly look at what can be done for, in addition to the property taxes, like I mentioned, which is really the biggest thing the city could do. I think property taxes, of course, dwarf utility payments. It's a fair question, and we will look at what is possible there. And there may be sort of comparable things to what I described in terms of sort of general fund borrowing. Maybe it's possible to do something comparable in our utilities. We'll take that. That's something we'll be working on in the weeks ahead.
So I think I don't have any further questions. So I think we're going to wrap up unless someone wants to try and get in a final question before we go ahead and wrap up.
I do see a question here from Meg. Do you have the power to enact a citywide rent and mortgage freeze? Do you support doing that before April 1 in order to ensure everyday people have resources in their very short-term needs? Yeah, I'm glad for that question and a chance to try to address this again. Some cities, so basically the short answer is no. We've looked at this hard, and the city does not have the ability to just unilaterally say, tenants, renters, don't worry, you can't be evicted. People own properties, don't worry, your bank can't foreclose on you. That is not something within the city's power to do. We do think that the governor has some additional powers here, and the state does have additional powers that in other states you have seen in different cities, mayors just announcing this. Those are cities where the structure and the way in which evictions happen, as I understand it, is just different, legally different from here, and the city plays a more direct role than we do here. Here's what I can say, though. I think it would be, and I think I might have said this earlier in the call, I think it would be crazy for anyone to, in the middle of a public health emergency and an economic crisis, for anyone to be evicted or foreclosed upon because they can't pay their rent or they can't pay their mortgage. This whole public health emergency depends on people staying in their homes. We should not be pushing people out of their homes and into other types of living situations. I see in these efforts at all levels of government a lot of concern about exactly this question, and I have a lot of optimism that somehow, as a coordinated government response, we're going to make sure that evictions like that don't happen. My understanding is they basically are not happening now because the courts are closed and not issuing new orders. I think that it's a high priority at all levels of government to make sure that we find a way that these kind of actions, evictions or foreclosures don't happen while we're in this emergency, and we'll keep advocating and fighting for that.
I have a question from BT Digger.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more what funds the city is? I'm a little bit confused about what funds the city is going to use to cover the $5 million shortfall.
Yeah. So there, I think in the council packet, I think there's a little bit more detail than in our PowerPoint summary. The funds, the big funds that is the Burlington Telecom Reserve that we've talked about. That is bigger than any of the other potential sources of funds, other than the unassigned fund balance, which is also everything above $6.5 million, would sort of be on the table for dealing with these next few months. We do have other smaller reserves that we think we could dip into. For example, we have a plowing salt reserve that we haven't had to spend very much of, that much of this year. There's a healthcare reserve that we may be able to take some dollars out of. So there are some other six-figure reserves that we may tap into to deal with this. But the largest two are certainly the unassigned fund balance and the nearly $5 million of uncommitted Burlington Telecom related revenues that the city is still holding. These were the revenues that there was some discussion of reinvesting, some or all of them back into Burlington Telecom. We didn't do that. These are available to us now to deal with this emergency. I'm starting to get hoarse here. Are we have
two more questions. One
okay,
from 2244 and one from BPR. Liam from BPR, you're calling on moving some of the residents out of Burlington Health and Rehab, but without widespread testing, it's unclear how much of the virus has spread in the facility. Is closing part of the facility the best course of action, or should the whole facility be closed?
So here's how I understand that question, and how I understand the facts on the ground. There is a shortage of testing in Vermont, no doubt. They, because of that shortage, acute shortage, which we are going to get some relief from soon. There are massive local, state, and federal efforts underway to change that system, that situation dramatically in just a matter of days or short weeks. But where we are now, as I understand it, is there still really is not nearly enough tests. However, there has been some testing, a significant amount of testing within the facility. I think there is a high degree of confidence that from what I am told, that the virus has not spread to the rehabilitation floors. And that is why there is an effort to get those residents, which are residents that are many of them are younger, many of them are healthier and more able to withstand a move to another location. There is a big effort going on, as I understand it, to relocate them elsewhere. I think there is still some concern. I know there's concern that even if they haven't tested positive, that given what's been going on in the building, there was concern about having those residents discharged to other locations with a lot of people in them. And that is why what the plan is to take them to a different location where they could stay until they were medically able to be discharged. And I believe, and ultimately it's the Department of Public Health that is responsible for this plan and needs to speak to it. But I think the plan is for there also to be some time at this additional facility, this other facility, to ensure that they don't have the virus before they are returned to some other type of housing. Did I address that whole question?
Yes, I believe so. This is going to be our last question. Devin with 2244. Governor Scott said further restrictions are inevitable as the virus continues to spread. Have you been in touch regarding that? Is there any particular restrictions you're advocating for?
I have been in touch with the governor's team over the weekend. I think the governor listen, I think we're fortunate to have a governor who gets the public health risk here, even though the numbers in Vermont remain relatively low compared to other parts of this country and the world, in some ways, on some measures. And he has been willing to act swiftly since he first declared the emergency. And I appreciate all of the public health actions, the social distancing actions he's taken so far. I am in regular contact with his team, and I have advocated for further steps. I think we should do everything we can to enforce this social distancing as quickly as we can until we know we have this under control. There is, I think, reason to be hopeful that we started taking steps early, and that the steps that have already been taken in a week or so, we'll start to see in the numbers that an impact of those changes. There's a lag between taking these steps and when you see an impact on the virus's spread. But we're working in a huge void of information right now. We don't have proper testing happening out there. We don't know yet whether the strategies that have been implemented so far are having an impact. So with the lack of information, I think we should pull the levers that we have seen some other states. It's not a huge number, but I think 8 or so other states have gone to some form of restricting all but non-essential, only allowing essential business activity to continue, some form of order to people who are not engaged in those essential activities to stay in their home. The details matter in how you make that order, and I know the governor's team is looking at those details, and I do support them making further changes as quickly as they can. Even though those orders aren't in place, I don't want any Burlingtonians who are watching this to think that that their responsibility ends, that the good that they can do ends with what the government has mandated. There is a lot of information out there, and we're constantly trying to push out more about what we all can do, exercising our own personal responsibility to slow down the spread of the virus. Again, I encourage people to check out the graphic we published yesterday. I thought that was helpful, and just to be aware whenever they are outside of the home that they are at some risk and they need to conduct themselves carefully. I think we are going to call this one a wrap. People who want to hear more about the city's plan, there is a way to watch the city council meeting that will start just a couple hours from now at 7 o'clock. I think we're using a similar interface to allow the public to watch and participate in the first of its kind Burlington City Council meeting, where virtually all will be located at remote locations, and where we will be restricting physical access into the building. We are not going to allow, I believe, we are not going to allow more than 10 people to come into Contoy's auditorium at any one time. We really encourage people, if they can, to participate, and they want to participate in the public forum. We encourage you to do so using the.
If you go to the city homepage, information is right there.
If you didn't hear that, just if you need information about how to do that, it's right on the city homepage, burlingtonvt.gov. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.